this does work. And where this came from is to say the developers are looking for what enhances the visibility and the accessibility and the amenities of the residential component. Something like this would. So we've learned that the Wakanza site isn't enough and the 10th Street just isn't enough. So it's one of those things where conceptually it would need that Carver parking lot, but potentially if you had structured parking and say even east of that or south or north somewhere that connected all of this together, that's how you would make up for that parking loss. And we have a struggle because it couldn't go to the south because we have the historic funeral home, we have the cross street connector and all of these things, and you have the restored Wakanza then to the north.
Which is that old garage to the south of the Warden too that could be used.
Absolutely, exactly. And so those are kind of the things we're just trying to kind of balance all the constraints to say what would work. A good question.
And that was always used for that. Warden owned that for a long time, that parking garage, and they'd rent spaces inside on the roof, along the side.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's on our map to say what if. So, yeah.
All the parking you're talking about is just ground level parking, not a ramp or anything?
Current today, it's all ground level everywhere. But what would likely need to happen, and we don't know how we pay for this, we don't know how it would look, or we don't know where it would go, but you'd have to look at some sort of structured higher density parking in the same footprint as you could fit 3 to 4 times the cars in a structured parking versus just spread out all over. So you have on-street parking, you have lots. City has several lots in the area, but you would need to figure out how you're going to take this additional 300 car load and keep it close to the amenity.
Well, you could take the lot behind funeral home, the city owns that.
Yeah, that's exactly. So those types of things you'd have to we're looking at and taking into
You
consideration.
could either walk a half a block or you could put in a skyway.
That's right.
Because we got more money and we got sense in this town. And Kelly Heineman, I used to be on the city council I know the financial institutions in town have about $250,000 sunk into the old Fairway building because that was somebody's great idea. Is the old Fairway, we had to own that because it had to be there. And those ended up being donations from financial organizations in this town who sort of, and now this is the latest great idea. I don't see any way. Is there really a way to float a $60-some million project, even if we're on the hook for half of it because some outfit in Kansas City is on the hook for the apartment?
Developers on the hook for half.
How are you ever going to do that without floating a bond?
Well, that's a great question. So right now, what we're also doing is we're looking at every resource we can. Face-to-face meetings with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Face-to-face, we went to Washington to talk about what can be done here. USDA, there's lots of things that go into play here. But just to put it in perspective, the demolition, if you are going to demolish that entire site, just say, hey, let's clean it up and make it ready for redevelopment, it's easily a $10 million ticket.
Right. But that's a poor reason to spend 30.
Well, yeah.
That's
So
20 million more if it's my checkbook, that's.
There's a couple ways to look at it. So if this is truly a target for redevelopment, which is what it is, you look at it and say, okay, can you spend a fraction of that, smaller, less than $5 million to clean the site, get it ready for redevelopment, and have, say, the Warden ready for that redevelopment? You could, KDG's in, which is good for them, but that could be competitively bid, no problem, and you'd have a lot of people interested in it.
I supported lots of forward-thinking projects in town, so I'm not that. Just sometimes these projects get all the pom-pom waivers on committees, and you have to have people with a critical eye who are willing to look at things and say, hey, look, this is just too big, it's too much, and it doesn't mean it's a bad idea, it just means you gotta look at everything on both sides, because it seems like a lot of money for
that's an
a
excellent
rec
point
center and a
because
cultural center.
we get to this design that we saw this week, and we had a lot of people right away saying, well, you didn't include my piece, and this is going to go. No, we're only on step 5, and we have 150 steps to go, and we're going to be at step 100 before we can do what you're talking about. So it's like, no, we're only on step 5, and we got to do step 6. And there is going to be a point where there may be a go, no go very quickly here, and that's what our job is to say, is this realistic or not? And so we want to make sure we have all the facts right, so that everybody can make a good decision as a community, but not you know what I mean? You get in somewhere, it's like, oh, we can't even deal with this. So,
Appreciate your answer.
yeah, no problem.
My question's in regard to the living quarters. Are you able to speak to that at all, or is that more of a development?
It's really KDG's development, and they don't have a design yet, but we're talking, it would not be low income, it would be market rate only. So what we could see here, at least what I know of, is if you take that 120,000 square feet, you divide it by 1,000 square feet a unit, which they'll vary, some will be smaller, some will be bigger. There's a crazy trend in one bedroom efficiencies in all over. So there's gonna be a percentage of those, and there's gonna be some larger. We could see this as, with market rate, it could be not the first time investment for folks, but like the second time investment, or hey, I wanna be there because I'm committed to Fort Dodge, I'm gonna be here long term. Some of the new jobs that are coming, say with Prestige Pork or others, they might move into what's vacated by the folks moving to the ward. So it's that, people ask, it's low income. No, it's not. Everything we're looking at is to not be low income, like new market tax credits, all these things we're making sure they don't require Section 8 or low income standards.
Is there any plan at all, it doesn't sound like it, for lack of a better term, say an even higher end, like say penthouse type thing?
Absolutely, yes,
Whether it be
absolutely.
a couple thousand square feet or something like that?
Even to the discussion level of saying, is there a fancy destination brew pub on the top level where the old water tanks used to be? Possibly. So taking it to another level, and it's one of those things where you want to create that solid investment for the future.
Well, speaking to what Kelly talked about, that was a big project, there was a lot of excitement, it was to be an activity center. And one of the reasons, as I remembered, it was put where it was is because of the 50,000 people draw that you were talking about. They said people aren't gonna come downtown to do that, we need to be out on this network connector. Plus, there was a committee formed to get this thing started. I think Nevin Mulholland and Tom Schnur was the co-chairman. But I don't know where that's at right now, but it just was too big a price tag, I think, is the main problem.
I know in a lot of the restoration of the older buildings, the asbestos removal is always a big factor in the cost. Have you got any preliminary figures on how much that would cost? Because a lot of times it runs way over what the estimates are. Is that a
Well, and that's why.
Deal killer? Or?
No, it's not a deal killer. However, the folks that I've talked to that I know that do this all the time say this is probably the largest in the state from a single project standpoint. It'd be wise to break it down into a couple different projects so that you have not only low and best bid on the first one, and whoever didn't get that one would get the next one. So we have a couple of potential vendors or contractors there to do that work in case one fails or what have you. But it could be in the $3 to $5 million range very easily, with a chunk of that being KDG's responsibility. So it is not insurmountable. I mean, a lot of your asbestos abatement projects are $500,000. I mean, those are kind of ugly ones, up to $800,000. So this is a little bit bigger. And what we can do is look at ways to say, how do you not send everything to landfill? How do you recycle the brick, crush the concrete on site, use it for road base, do whatever, so that it's not all just ship it to the landfill. You know, and pay your dump fees and pay your transportation fees. Those are big chunks of that cost, literally. And so the more you can recycle and repurpose them on site to get it to where it needs to go without sending to landfill, the better. Because those fees are huge, especially on a project that size. So, great question.
Yeah, no, you talked about the 65 million for the whole, that doesn't include any parking.
It does to some degree, so it just depends on what kind of parking we need to do.
Yeah.
And so there's an assumption in that number for it, and there's a lot of things that have been refining, trying to figure out what's going on.
Start finding people, Charlie. It's ridiculous.
Must be.
Yeah, but I go to the rec center like, between 5 and 6 every morning, and there's a lot of cars there. And it's, to get there to a class is an effort, and to walk 5 blocks when you get there.
That's right.
And that's a big concern to the people there.
Well,
to have parking.
excellent point. What I brought up multiple times is if you look at, just say the rec alone. So if you have the rec facility, so by standards and my years of operating facilities and the costs associated, your construction costs, let's say it's, the pick an easy number, is $25 million. Okay, that's the raw construction. You take that $25 million and that'll be 2% of your life cycle cost. So over 30 years, 6% is your operations and maintenance. So it's gonna cost you about $75 million over 30 years to operate that facility. So what I'm also bringing to the front is to say, okay, if you're willing to do this capital raise here, you also have to allocate just over $2 million a year to maintain it and operate it. that doesn't count all the staff and programs. That just counts, hey, this is a new building and you've got to do something with it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that deal, no deal, is to say, are you okay with this 25 million and are we okay with this 75 million? So the life of this is that you've got to make sure that that's a doable piece, which, you know, that's where you reach out to Friendship Haven and say, are you willing to partner? Are you willing to pay, not really memberships, but what's your involvement here? Or Unity Point to say, hey, what's your involvement here long-term to help offset those annual costs to maintain this facility? And right now, all three of those organizations are very, they may not have capital today, but they're like, in order for us to continue the programs, we need to continue or essentially grow, we're on board. And so that's where we're trying to focus not only the initial part, but then the ongoing part to say, how do we offset that risk? It's no different than doing a at-risk development somewhere and saying, I hope somebody leases it up. Well, if you can get 50%, 30 to 50% of your tenants before you put a shovel in the ground, that's a big deal. And so that's what we're trying to do as well, to say, is that viable? So between now, this April and next April, how many tenants can we get? You know, could there be a medical clinic? Could there be physical therapy? Could there be Friendship Haven having some partnership with this? Possibly. And with conversation with Julie today was very promising on, I think we're up for committing to figuring out how we can partner with you. And Dan Kinney said the same thing. He's like, I got a swim program, and you know what? You only have 6 lanes in your original, but you tell me what it'd take to get me 8 lanes, and then I can do competitive swim there, and bring spectators and do those things. And that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And we know now, based on this first round of planning, what those increments could be. That's $1 million upcharge. Well, that's a capital piece. And then, okay, Dan, $1 million, but then what are you willing to commit to the program ongoing? So we're looking at both sides of it. So it's not just a capital raise as much as it is to say, yep, capital raise, but we got to make sure we got this taken care of as well. So, and parking is another piece of it. How do we look at transportation? How do we look at overall? That's a big chunk of it, because we need to be able to bring people close to the amenity, because then that enhances its. Are you going to buy a nice residence or rent a nice apartment that's 2,000 square feet if you can't park anywhere nearby? Probably not. And so those things go hand in hand, and we got to make sure we are very careful throughout that process to plan those things in.
Did you talk to the college at all about there being like a competitive 200-meter track in there?
The 200-meter track isn't going to be feasible based on the footprint, but that was a part of the conversation. So the college is struggling with, we have all of our students that are around that want to use the facilities. We've got all of our athletes that want to use the facilities. And Dan's like, I finally had to say, okay, this time frame's for athletes, and then, okay, the students, you could use